Hey, my name's TC Burr. Welcome to Yet, a podcast created to encourage you to get your goal or idea out of your head and into reality. On this podcast, you'll hear stories, encouragements, tips, and ideas to help you write your book, start your business, launch your podcast, or whatever it is you hope to accomplish. Because it's not that you haven't done it, it's just that you haven't done it yet. Hey listeners, it's TC. Welcome to Yet. This is episode 1, and I am so glad that you are here listening. Today, we're going to talk about how we got here, why we're here, and where we're going. Now, I'm not going to attempt to answer some of those deep philosophical questions about life. I do think those questions have answers, by the way, but for the scope of this podcast, I just want to share a little bit about myself, what some of the goals of this podcast are, and what you can expect as you continue to listen. So who am I? Well, I'm a husband, I'm a dad, I'm a corporate employee. I'm a normal guy. But recently, I've undergone a major mindset shift and I've dove headfirst into the world of side hustles. I am now writing a book, starting a podcast, dreaming up a business, and all of these changes happened because of a few key things converging all at once in my life. And I'm so excited about these changes in my life and the progress that I've seen even in a relatively short period of time. And I want to share that encouragement and that excitement with more people because I think there are other people out there who might be in the same situation I was in. So I work for a good company. I've got a great boss, my team is fun, and I have decent pay and great benefits. So, all things considered, I'm in a really good situation. I've been at the company I work for a number of years, and I've mostly been happy there. But for the longest time, I've had this feeling kind of gnawing at me in the back of my mind that maybe there's something more that I should be doing. For the longest time, I've had this goal, this desire to write a book. Actually, I've got ideas of multiple books written down in journals and notebooks and in my notes app and my phone. And not just like titles of books. I've got plots of books and characters and scenes all kind of sketched out in these bullet list kind of formats. But they just sat there in those notebooks for years. They sat there collecting dust. Because in my mind, I had this kind of binary way of thinking in terms of what my options were at that point. So the way that I viewed life at that point in my life was there were really only two options available for me. Either I could stay at my current job and continue to collect the paycheck, do a good job there, enjoy the benefits, and never write my book. And to be honest, that option did not sound very fun to me. But the other option was I could give my 2 weeks notice. I could sell my house and move to a cabin out in the woods somewhere and just become a writer. And that one sounded a little more fun, but it didn't sound very feasible. So I had this whole kind of, binary way of thinking that these were the only two options that existed. But around my 41st birthday, I had a few things happen to me that really completely shifted my entire mindset and got me to the point where I have started really making progress on my book. So the first thing that happened was it was around my birthday. So I was doing what I always do leading up to my birthday, kind of an annual review, a life audit, if you will. I was thinking about life just in different categories. So I thought about like financially, spiritually, marriage-wise, parenting, like, are there any things in my life that maybe I should tweak? I like to just kind of get a checkup on how things are going. By the way, if you don't do this, I would encourage you to do it. You can do it ahead of birthdays. Lots of people do it at the beginning of a new year, but you don't have to wait for one of those times. You can do this at any point, and it's just a good way to kind of keep stock on how things are going in your life, and maybe there's areas where you might want to change something just to kind of optimize how well you're doing in that particular area. So that was the first thing that happened. Then I got an encouraging email from a friend. And I don't remember the exact language, but it was something to the effect of, hey, if you've got a goal or an idea, a thing that you want to do, you should go for it. And I remember being so encouraged and inspired by that message. But that by itself wasn't enough. Around the same time, I started reading a book that my mother-in-law loaned to me called Atomic Habits by James Clear. If you haven't read Atomic Habits, I would commend it to you. I referenced it on episode 0 of the podcast. It is a really good book. A lot of people have read it, but if you haven't, I would encourage you to go check it out. In that book, he kind of talks about this idea of, if you want to be a particular type of person, there are habits that you should create and implement in your life that you can do daily that will, over time, accumulate and compound and move you forward toward being that type of person. So in my case, I wanted to be a writer. But maybe you're not a writer. Maybe you want to be a business owner, or maybe you just want to be a person who is physically fit, or whatever your goal is. He says, take this big vision of who you want to be and then scale it down to an easily repeatable task that you can do over and over and over. So I took him at his word. I started writing. I realized that the only thing that was keeping me from being a writer at that point was the fact that I hadn't been writing anything. And so since that point and for several months forward, I have been writing anywhere between 100 to 800 words a day. And sometimes more, sometimes less. There have been days where I'll skip, on occasion for one reason or another. But essentially every day since then, I've been working toward my book. And I'm happy to report that in no time at all, I will be holding a completed manuscript of my first draft. Now, I know I've still got a long ways to go. This is only a first draft. I'm going to need beta readers. I'm going to need to go through the editing process. I've got to figure out publishing. It's such a journey that I'm on, right? But this is going to be a major milestone for me. And it never would have happened if I hadn't started taking those small, actionable steps. So for a little while, I was writing my book, but I was doing it in secret. Like Lil Wayne says, real G's move in silence like lasagna, which, by the way, is an awesome song lyric. But that's what I did. I was, my wife knew I was writing the book, but I didn't really tell anyone else. But after a while, I started to get a little bit of momentum, and I just couldn't keep it in anymore. So then I started sharing that I was writing a book with other people. And that's where things got really exciting for me. Because as I started sharing this with coworkers and people at my church and friends, I feel like I gave people the freedom to open up and share about the things that they were working on. And I was overwhelmed with the number of people in my life that have a side hustle, whether it's writing a book or launching a business or starting a podcast. It seemed like so many people I talked to were just like, oh, that's awesome that you're writing a book. Guess what? My wife and I started this company or I've started this blog, or I'm doing this business. And I've just like, man, this is so awesome. And I remember I was having a conversation with my friend Brad, and he was telling me about a company that he and his wife started. And we were just kind of over coffee, like, man, this is amazing. We were so encouraged, and we were feeding off of one another's excitement and encouragement. And I remember in that moment thinking, man, we've got to find a way to get this encouragement and this excitement out to more people. And that is kind of how the idea of the podcast was born. I didn't jump into it right away, but I started to think about, man, it would be awesome to share this out with more people. And so that's kind of how we ended up with the Yet podcast, because I think there are so many people out there who have an idea, who have a goal, and for whatever reason, they haven't started making much progress on it yet. So I want to encourage that person. So there's actually 3 kind of main goals that I'm pursuing when it comes to this podcast. I have hundreds of goals for this podcast, but the 3 main ones, if I could kind of distill it down to 3 main ones, that the first one is I do want to encourage the me that I used to be. Because for so many years, I worked a job that I liked, that I was good at, but I didn't feel like was my calling and my purpose in life. And maybe that's you. Maybe you've got a job where, it's not a bad job, but you just have this creative energy. You have this idea. You have this other thing that you feel like you've got to do, but you haven't done it yet. I want to encourage that person because, again, I think that this is not, for a long time, I thought that side hustles and starting your own business and writing books, I thought this was like something that was reserved for this elite category of people that I could never be a part of. But I've learned that that's just not true. There are so many people, normal people, who have decided, you know what, I've been putting my dream or my goal off long enough, It's time to roll up my sleeves and get in the fight. And I think it's time for you to roll up your sleeves and get in the fight too. So that's goal number one. I want to encourage the me that I used to be. Number two, I want to amplify the stories of normal people doing amazing things. Because again, I talked to so many friends and they shared with me their things that they're working on. And I would have had no idea if I didn't start having the conversation. So I want to share their stories with you because I think you'll be just as inspired and as encouraged as I have been. And lastly, I want to build a community of people who can share ideas, encourage one another, celebrate success together. I think that when it comes to the world of small business, book writing, side hustle, being creative, and really just life in general, you and I were not created to do this alone. We need one another for encouragement, for accountability, for idea sharing. And so I want to create a community where we can do that. So those are the three main goals that I have. So what should you expect on this podcast? Well, as I've said before, I want to bring you stories, encouragements, tips, and ideas to help you start your business, write your book, launch your podcast, or whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. So I'm going to talk a lot about side hustles and entrepreneurship, but don't think that this is only for business owners. This is for anyone who has a goal that they want to make progress against. So it could be a financial goal, a savings goal, a fitness goal. Like it could be literally any goal that you want to tackle. But a lot of the people that I'm going to talk to are writing books, doing podcasts, or launching businesses. So I'm going to do solo episodes like this one where I share some thoughts or ideas, things that I'm learning as part of my journey as I'm writing the book and doing the podcast. And I'm going to bring on guests who are going to talk about the things that they're doing. And I'm going to ask them questions like, hey, what's the biggest lesson that you've learned as you got started? Or what advice would you give to someone who's just getting started? So hopefully you'll be able to take learnings from some of these other folks and leverage that as you're working toward your thing. If you remember on the last podcast episode, I gave you some podcast homework. Now, if you haven't done the homework, don't worry, it's not too late. Just to recap, I asked you to come up with a list of ideas, of goals, things you might want to accomplish in the next 6 to 12 months. And then from there, narrow it down to a list of 2 or 3. I think sometimes we get in this habit of setting a ton of goals and trying to tackle everything at once. And that's such a quick recipe for burnout. So pick 2 or 3 that you want to focus on. And then for each, break them down into those, what James Clear would put into the 2-minute rule. So something you can accomplish in 2 minutes that will move you forward to your goal. So if you have a writing goal, for example, that would be like write 1 sentence. So if you haven't done that yet, do that in advance of the coming episodes, and then I'll give you further homework and instruction as we go. This is intended to build and iterate on one another. So if you don't do it, that's okay, but I would encourage you to do that. On the next episode, I'm going to encourage you to get going on your thing and tell you why sometimes trying to find your passion can actually be counterintuitive toward making progress. Now, listen to a couple of previews of what to expect this season on the Yet podcast.
To design something on a computer and then to actually see it on apparel, but then to see people wearing it, it's like, I made that.
It's out there.
That's really cool.
And I was just thinking like, man, maybe I could do something like a podcast or a show and just give it a shot and see what happens.
So we didn't start with 300. I started with 3,
Nice.
So the first people that I interviewed were people that I knew, or they were recommended by guests that I interviewed. So
Sure. Yeah.
everybody that came on, I would say, hey, I appreciate you coming on. Do you have somebody else that you think kind of fits this space?
Not need to waste time trying to find your passion before you just start doing things. Just do anything. Follow your curiosity.
We were able to go out into like busy streets on like corners where a coffee shop couldn't go because they would have to pay an arm and a leg to put a brick and mortar on the side of this busy corner.
Yeah.
And we were able to go out there and hundreds of people saw us every day. Whether they bought something or not, they drove by us like on their way to work or wherever they were going. And so it was a really great way. It was kind of like a billboard basically.
Yeah.
While we were also selling coffee.
don't be that person. Don't be the person that just shows, like, I literally just did a post of, like, this looks all together, but, like, you should see what's behind me. Like, it's a hot mess behind me. And it's okay. Like, that, don't be the person that just shows the good. Like, be real. People need to see more real in life, that's for sure.
So the big lesson for me has been make that time count. Like, if you're choosing to not spend time with family, it needs to add up to something. You cannot just like mess around for an hour and then be like, oh, my business isn't growing the way I want it to. So that's something I learned from my community. Like, make your power hours, choose a power hour and then make it count.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you liked what you heard, share the podcast with your friends. I would love to get these stories, encouragements, tips, and ideas out to as many people as possible. And this is a brand new podcast, so I'd love your help in spreading the word. Also, I would really appreciate it if you would scroll down to the bottom of your podcast app and rate and review the shows. Your reviews mean so much to me, so I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. Lastly, if you have any questions or ideas for the show, I would love to connect. You can find me on Instagram at YetPodcast or send me an email, yetpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, keep working on your goals, and I'll see you soon.